cinnamon rolls, a fun breakfast treat for Mother's Day, fun to make with your kids especially. So the recipe for the dough is very similar to the donut recipe that you might have watched a week or so ago. A few simple ingredients: flour, sugar, salt, vanilla extract, 1 egg, butter and milk. I'll put the exact ingredients in the notes. The yeast I started rising. This is a tablespoon of yeast, or you could also use 1 package if you purchase it that way. This, to start, we have 2 cups of flour, and Jane, my daughter Jane, is going to add 1 teaspoon of salt, and then a 1/4 cup of sugar. I'll get the sugar. Okay, now you can whisk those together just to make sure that they're well incorporated. All right, now then my tablespoon of yeast and warm water, about a 1/2 cup of warm water. You can see that it's nice and bubbly. That means it's good and active. So we're going to make a well in the middle and put in our 1 egg. This egg is at room temperature. I let it sit out to get to room temperature. And then we need, Jane, we need 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Where did our teaspoon go? I took it away. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract.
Just into
here. And this is 1 cup of room temperature milk and a 1/2 cup of butter.
2 teaspoons?
Yeah, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. There you go. You don't have to melt the butter. I think it's a little easier to knead dough when the butter is melted, but if you do melt it, you have to just wait for it to cool down because you don't want it to be so hot that it damages the yeast. So 1/2 cup of butter, 1 cup of milk, 1 egg, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and then we're going to add, our yeast, and in my big bowl, and mix that together, and then we'll need to add some flour. I have the habit of putting my ingredients aside after I've added them because if I'm hurried or distracted, sometimes I can't remember if I've added an ingredient, and if I put it to the side, I know that I did. So I don't add salt twice or something yucky like that. It's helpful too because with yeasted dough, we're of course going to knead the dough and create some space for us. Jane and I both washed our hands before we got started here, so our hands are nice and clean. Keep adding flour. If you're doing this together, this is a good taking turns part. My turn? Okay, so when it gets too hard to stir, rubber scraper can't handle it anymore, we'll just dump it out and start kneading, which is the fun part. This is not a huge recipe, which is a good thing because donuts and cinnamon rolls don't really keep very well. So you could freeze, but this will, depending on the size of your cinnamon roll, this will make 8 to 12 cinnamon rolls. So I'm going to knead, and as with all yeasted doughs, if it gets too sticky, just add flour. If you have more than one person working, you can break it in half and work together, or you can take turns if you have a limited space, or if you need to practice taking turns. we'll just do. Okay. What you want it to be is pretty smooth so that it's not sticking to your hands too much anymore. It usually takes, if you split it in half, it takes less time, but it usually takes 5 to 10 minutes to get it good to go. You don't want to go much beyond that, because if you add too much flour, which you can do, it will make your dough dense and hard to chewy. Not very delicious. Okay, so I'm going to put that back in with yours. When it's pretty well incorporated, you can squish it back together, and then we're going to let that rise for about an hour till it's about doubled in size. So, but I did that earlier today so that I could show you right away how to do the cinnamon roll part. So for the next phase of work, what you need is, I'm going to leave this flour here because I need it, a half a cup approximately of granulated sugar with about a tablespoon of cinnamon added, and then I just mixed it together. And in this other little bowl, I have 1 egg and 1 tablespoon of milk that I mixed together. Another way to do that would be just to melt another 1/4 cup of butter. I prefer this because the problem with butter is that sometimes the cinnamon rolls pop open, and this is a little bit better, and this already has so much butter in it we don't really need more. This is the risen dough from the stuff that I started this morning. So I think, Jane, we need a little more flour. Would you sprinkle a little more on here? Mm-hmm. We're going to roll this out into a rectangle. There we go. That's not. So it'll stick to the counter. That's why we're flouring. So that with your hands, make it into a rough shape so that's kind of a rectangle. And then with your rolling pin, you roll it. You want it to be about a 1/2 inch thick or a little less, because dough will of course rise and we're going to roll, so you don't want it to be thick at all. And you want to try to keep the rectangle shape if you can, because you want your cinnamon rolls to be kind of close to the same size. If they're all different sizes, then you'll have some that are uncooked in the middle and some that are burnt. The little ones will be burnt and the big ones will be squishy and not very yummy. So that's not good. Rectangle. Tends to be a little thicker in the middle, so you move that out a little bit. Now, what Jane's gonna do is, I have a pastry brush here. You can do this with your fingers if you prefer. Some pastry brushes are actual bristles. It doesn't really matter. But you just want to spread a thin coat. She's not going to use all of that. There will be quite a bit left over. Just a thin coat. And the only purpose of this is to give the cinnamon sugar something to adhere to, something to stick to. It doesn't really provide any flavor and stuff. And a very more common way of making cinnamon rolls is to melt butter and spread it on here. That will work just as well. But like I said, I prefer this because the rolls tend to stay together a little bit better, and it's this already has so much butter in it, I'm just not really compelled to add more. Not that it's a low-fat recipe, it's not, but... Okay, so... All right, the next fun step is to take the cinnamon sugar. This is more than we need. We're not going to use all of this. This is enough for 2 recipes, and we're going to sprinkle it all over. You don't want it to be piled up. You just want a sprinkling, because we're going to roll. So you're going to have 3 or 4 times as much. So even though cinnamon sugar is one of our family favorites, if you pile it up, it's over the top too much. So just a light sprinkling all around. that's another reason why cinnamon rolls pop open if you've got way too much cinnamon sugar. You can add brown sugar if you like brown sugar. It will make it gooier a little. Those are called sticky buns. If you like sticky buns, you can add brown sugar, but I'm going for a straight cinnamon roll here. Then I'm on the long end here, right guys? So rolling up. Slowly so that the roll is the same all the way across. Would you get one of those big knives over there? So you can do the cinnamon roll part with a knife, or if you have a big pair of scissors that has a long blade on it, you could use those as well. I guess it depends on the surface you're on. If you're on a cutting board or a granite countertop like we have, then the knife is fine, but if you have a surface that you don't want to damage, you might want to use scissors. This is a little wasteful, but I always cut off the end because the end is going to be cattywampus and it doesn't have a lot of cinnamon sugar in it, and I like for my cinnamon rolls to look like cinnamon rolls. So this is parchment paper. You could also grease a cookie sheet if you would prefer to grease a cookie sheet. I like the parchment paper. And then you're going to cut them all about the same width. So about 1.5 inches or 1 inch down. You want to do some. And then we put it so that the roll is up on our sheet. You can either put them touching if you like to have the soft part between. We usually separate them because I like them to be their own individual rolls, and then we're going to ice them at the end. But if you prefer not to use a cookie sheet, you could do it in a pan, but then they would all be squished together. If you were making sticky buns, I would definitely use like a pie pan, because then all the stickiness will go into the pan and not all over your oven. Not that I've ever done that. All right. Shaping them back into a cinnamon. These are beautiful. You did a good job, Jane. Okay. Our knives are really dull, but you could also use a butter knife. This doesn't really require a sharp knife. And kids, of course, if you're using a big knife, you would want to have adults standing right beside you and making sure that your fingers are always in a safe place. All right, there we go. So these will just rise, not until they're doubled, because otherwise they'll sink. So just maybe 10-15 minutes, and then I'm going to stick them in the oven. But in the interest of time and showing you what's fun, I have some that are already ready, and Jane and I are going to show you how we glaze them. Let me put this down. Okay, so this is just an extra piece of parchment paper, and those are rolls that we baked earlier today. They've had a chance to cool. They're still a little bit warm. You don't want them to be hot when you glaze, because the icing will melt and fall right off. It's not terrible, but you don't want to do that too much. The icing, I'll put in the notes, is about 4 cups, 4 or 4.5 cups of confectioner's sugar, 2 teaspoons of corn syrup, and a little bit of hot water. So with a glaze, and also 3/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla extract. With a glaze, you want it to be runny, so that it will slide down. You could also frost these, but the glaze is really fun and it's fun to do. So once your rolls are cool enough that you can easily hand them, stick it into the glaze. The reason that the parchment paper is there is so that it will catch the drips, because it'll drip right down. And then you put it on there to drip. And then I'll just leave them there for probably 30 minutes or so, so that they can solidify. So the glaze can solidify a little bit. And this is a wonderful, wonderful treat to wake up to on Mother's Day. The only problem with leaving them out to cool is that if you walk away, there's some risk in my family that when you come back, all your rolls might not be there anymore. So, guys, I hope you get to make cinnamon rolls, moms, with the little people in your life, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Mother's Day.